Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this Leanpub podcast, I'll be interviewing Ilya Gelman. Ilya is the head of the New York office of 500 Tech, a leading Israeli consultancy with expertise in Angular and React. He is active speaking at and organizing conferences and meetups around the world, including the React Next conference. Along with his colleague, Boris Dinkovich, Ilya is co-author of the Leanpub book, The Complete Redux Book, Everything You Need to Build Real Projects with Redux. As they say in the description of their book, it will teach you everything you need to use Redux to build complex and production-ready web applications. In this interview, we're going to talk about Ilya's professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk about his experience a little bit using Leanpub to self-publish. So thank you, Ilya, for being on a Leanpub podcast.
Thank you for having me, Len.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you first became interested in software development and how you made your way to the New York office for 500 Tech.
So my story might be a bit different from other people's stories because initially I didn't want to become a programmer. So my story begins at school when I had to select one of the subjects that I would learn through my latest grades. This is how this works in Israel. So I chose computer sciences, and I was really interested in it, and I love to play with computers, and I worked as assistant for our network administrator at school. And this is one of the subjects I did best. I think I got highest grades in that subject. But when it came time to go to the army, I received a proposal to go to programming forces. People just go and for 3 years, for 4 years, they just write code in the army. And I said, well, I don't want to be a programmer. That time I want to be a designer. After a few years, I realized what a huge mistake I made. So it was 3 years in the army, and I always like to design things and to build new tools, new products. And I can't say that I'm a gifted designer, but sometimes I wanted to make something done, and I had to find programmers. And it was really hard to do because good programmers are really hard to find, especially to find programmers that would do things for free. And I decided that, well, that's a good time to learn some programming. So I decided just to learn Ruby on Rails on my own, just to be able to build my own ideas, to bring them to life. So while I was in the army, I learned Ruby on Rails, built a couple of projects, and then by the time it was, and then when it was time to get discharged from the army, I had to decide what I'm going to do with my life. So by that time, I was already married, so I needed to find a job, and I had a decision between going to art school and getting a degree in arts, or getting some fast course on programming and finding a job as a programmer. And I felt kind of confident that I would succeed in that, so I tried to find any courses that would teach me some Ruby on Rails. That's the thing that I was familiar with at that time. And I found a company called 500 Tech, which organized a Ruby course, and they also promised to help with finding a job after the course. So I contacted them and I said, I'm just going to get discharged from IDF. I'm looking for a job, and I want to take your course. And I was invited for an interview to see what my level is. And Adam, one of the partners, interviewed me, and he said, well, you know that you don't need a course. Would you like to join us and work with us? And I was pretty amazed by that, because people like me, where they have no understanding of how industry works or what's the level of people in the industry, it's really hard to understand and to estimate your skills. So I was pretty amazed. And then after a few days, they gave me some assignments. I did them, and I invited me to join 500 Tech as a JavaScript programmer. Though they just said that you don't need Ruby course, but we like your Ruby code, but you're going to write JavaScript. That's how it all started.
That's a really interesting story. I've got a couple of questions related to that. But first, you actually, when you mentioned joining the IDF and doing your service for 3 years, you reminded me of something I encountered years ago in Greece, actually, which was I met a lot of young Israelis who were just about to start their military service, and I was told that it was conventional for someone to go on a holiday before those years start. Is that something that was sort of I just stumbled across and is not that normal, or is that something that's actually quite normal?
No, this is actually a pretty popular thing in Israel, because many people, when they get discharged, they receive some amount of money from the government, and some people decide to go like for a couple of months until a couple of years of traveling all around the world just to see the world before they start their adult life, before they go to university or before they get a job.
Okay, that's interesting because I was talking about like before you start your service. That these were kids who were sort of sent on holiday by their parents to have some fun before going. But I've actually met at least one person who did exactly what you just described quite a few years ago in Canada. That's really interesting. I didn't know that was common to take some time afterwards to travel and do things.
Yeah, so I haven't heard about people going to holiday before the army, but after it's really common. I think every other person just goes to travel around the world just to see how it looks like, how it feels like to be outside of Israel.
And so you did you sort of taught yourself how to code as a sort of side project during those years.
Yeah, that's correct. So I found there was plenty of free material about Ruby on Rails, and I was always excited how easy it is to just educate yourself on programming on the internet.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. It's one of the topics that often comes up on this podcast because so many of the people that I interview are developers, and I find about half formally studied computer science and half didn't. But that's not necessarily a good indicator of what they currently think the best path is for someone who might be thinking about starting out. And I was wondering what your advice would be, say, for someone who's, smart and 18 and maybe doesn't have a few years of military service ahead of them, but, can decide what career path to go down at that moment. Do you feel that you missed out because you didn't do a computer science degree at a university?
On the contrary, I feel actually that not spending a lot of time doing the degree actually helped me concentrate on building actual skill set for the job I'm doing currently. But, I know a lot of people who did a science degree, and it kind of depends on what kind of company you want to work for, because some larger companies, you can't really, or you're going to have really bad time getting to an interview without a science degree, computer science degree. Because some companies just filter out all the people that don't have it. But a lot of really talented programmers I've met, a lot of them don't have any science degree, but I think it's a matter of luck on how to get a good mentors and get into a good company that will teach you and educate you on how to be a good programmer, despite you not having a computer science degree. It could help, but you have to remember that it takes you 3 to 4 years. And that time you might use for building your experience or portfolio. So it's like a trade-off.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I hear that from quite a few people, and that just keep in mind that if you want to work for a big company, they might have some formal requirements. But if you want to get into software development, it's not necessary to get a computer science degree, especially because of all the great materials out there. And I know that. Actually, you got into convening meetups and speaking at conferences and organizing conferences and things like that. And I was wondering, you talk about building your portfolio. That's actually, I imagine, a little bit part of that. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you got into that. I think it's something some people find a little bit intimidating to do, but from what I could tell online, it appeared to come pretty naturally to you to be involved in that way.
Yeah, well, for me, it was I was pretty lucky to work at a company that does so much around front-end community in Israel and all around the world. So when I came to company, they were already having these meetups for Angular. React didn't exist yet back then, but they ran a couple of meetups for Angular, meetups for startups, and it was kind of natural to see all the people coming on stage, talking, giving the talks, and eventually I started to help organize these things. And, I started by attending meetups, right? So I didn't just jump right in. And when I was at the beginning of my path, it was really intimidating, really, to think about, well, one day maybe I could go on stage and present something just as the other people doing. Because when you are junior developer, you don't really estimate your skills in the correct way. And then you see all these people coming on stage and speaking about some advanced concepts. And sometimes you don't understand what they speak about because like it's completely different topic or completely different domain. And you think, well, am I able to do that? And that's one of the reasons that my first tech talk wasn't actually technical. So it was like something more, broad. I chose a broad topic to begin with because like I didn't feel really confident to present something really advanced. But when you do it a lot of times, you kind of start to understand the kind of people that speak at meetups. They aren't really different from you. They all speak some complete weird things on stage, and they make mistakes. And we're all people, and junior developers can sometimes teach the audience much more actual useful things than senior developers that like maybe write less code or now managing teams instead of actually being hands-on the projects.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I saw, speaking of useful things, I saw an interesting distinction that you made in a presentation called The Productive Developer, where you talk about how being productive does not necessarily equal being good. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that idea.
Yeah, I think that was my first presentation. Like it wasn't technical, and I think what I meant by this point is my whole talk was about getting productive as a developer. So all developers were speaking about performance of their tools, so how this framework is fast compared to another framework, how these software runs faster, how do we write faster algorithms. But no one actually talks about self-productivity and how you as developer produce results faster, and you don't spend much time around you don't spend much time on using the tools. You spend time on actually creating stuff. And so my whole talk was about how do you get more productive? How do you produce more content in the same period of time? So it was the disclaimer that the amount of work or the amount of lines of code that you produce over an hour doesn't mean you're gonna produce really good lines of code. So it's important to remember that before you start jumping and running and writing some lines of code right away, you have to sometimes stop a bit and think before you write your code. So you might be really productive in using all the shortcuts and being able to produce a lot of code. So, for example, you could implement a feature in a week instead of a month, but this feature that you implemented in a week might be really hard to extend and maintain and rewrite, refactor in a few months from today. So it's like being productive doesn't mean being a good developer. So that's a good distinction to make.
Yeah, that is really good. It reminded me of someone I was talking with recently who tries to use a practice of deleting code, like deleting everything that they've done after they've solved the problem. Because once you've solved the problem, you know better than you did when you started writing that batch of code where you need to end up. And it can sometimes be better to actually throw out all your work and start over when you know where you're going to get to, rather than be stuck with all your mistakes and false paths that you had before you knew the destination. In another presentation, you talk about the banana gorilla problem. This is a concept from the programming world that not everybody might be familiar with, and it's a colorful one, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think that was one of the first presentations as well, as when I spoke about composition versus inheritance. So there's two patterns that people that learn computer science, they are familiar with usually, and also people working with object-oriented languages. They usually know the inheritance pattern very well, and people working with functional styling programming, they know the composition very well. And sometimes those people don't know both concepts. So I was explaining about composition is when you have, for example, say a class, and it could be composed from some other classes. Like, for example, it could borrow some methods from different modules and then compose one object or one entity. With versus inheritance, when your classes have to be children or parents of other classes, or how to call them, superclasses or subclasses. And so specifically about the banana gorilla problem is when one class that you import, it has so many methods inherited from a lot of superclasses that you didn't intend to import. Like, for example, if you create a vehicle, right? It's really simple, but you want to make now a specific type of vehicle. Like, for example, out of car, you want to create a Mercedes, and this Mercedes can drive, it can be a hunk, it can brake, and also you can create, an airship. Like, so you have an airborne vehicle and you have a plane. So this plane can take off, it can land, it can fly, it could have a jet engine. But what if you want to create a combined version of these two? What if you can create a Mercedes that can also fly? How do you do it? You can't really inherit from two classes. Like in some languages you could, but and what if these flying Mercedes should only implement only the subset of the methods on these two superclasses? How do you do that? So sometimes you don't have enough time to recreate the taxonomy or refactor all of your structure of the model. And what you end up with is flying Mercedes that, despite you didn't want him to have a jet engine, you have it just because it inherited from airborne vehicle. So that's kind of problem when you only want a banana, but what you actually get is gorilla holding a banana and the whole jungle comes with it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that image. Your book is about something called Redux, and I was wondering if you could talk about what that is and why it merited a book being written about it.
Redux is, if you speak about it in plain words, is how to describe it, a predictable JavaScript state container, right? But when you put it that way, a lot of people don't really understand what does it mean. What does it mean predictable? What does it mean state container? So in a few words, Redux is basically three things. It means that you have a global state of your application when you put all your data and all of your UI state, how it looks, how it works. And this global state can only be changed by instructions that you put from outside. In Redux, those instructions called actions, for instance. So you say, okay, I have a button, and now when I click, this button should turn red. So the state now changes. And this way of organizing your state in one object and telling how to change the state by instructions, this is basically what Redux is. And by predictable, it means that every time you send an instruction to this Redux store, you create a new store. So you can save the old one in history, and you can traverse back and forth and see how the state changed. And because you write it in the declarative way, so instead of writing that store.change something, you just describe how store should change in response to the instructions or to these actions. This means that you can always understand and realize how your store or how your state would look like after every single action. It is what makes it predictable. And this small library, I think it's a couple hundreds of lines of code. I can go over it in half an hour. And this simplicity, I think, it's the most powerful concept about this library, and this is why it's so popular. So it's so small, but it solves really, really hard problem in creating complex UIs.
And it, I believe it came about accidentally. Yeah.
So the funny story about Redux that its creators, Dan Abramov and Andrew Clark, really awesome guys, but they didn't intend to create a replacement for this Flux button that was presented initially by Facebook. They just Dan wanted to present a new idea at ReactConf, and he kind of just proposed the idea, and then he sat and figured out, well, how am I doing this? So his proposal was, how to put it? His proposal was time traveling in React applications. And by that time, no one did time traveling. So we kind of sat down and thought how this might work. And eventually this became, after a few iterations, of course, this became like a very popular library that everyone uses, that or every other person uses in his React projects. And this is, just to mention what we talked about previously about a lot of people being intimidated to speak at meetups or conferences. I've done this for some time, and I can tell a small secret to all these people that are being intimidated and want to speak but don't really know how to approach this. A lot of people that sending proposals to conferences and to meetups, they have no idea how they are going to present something that they are proposing to speak about. So like an example of Dan, he just sent an idea and then he just figured out how to do it. I do it sometimes as well. So sometimes I propose an idea that interests me, but I don't really know or completely understand. And then if it gets accepted, I just spend some time on learning it and building things around it and just trying to understand it and find a way to explain it in the best way I can.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that tip and that explanation. That's really good. I was wondering, I wanted to ask what brought you and your colleague Boris, who I believe is the CEO of 500 Tech and founder, what brought you to decide to write a book, which is a pretty big undertaking?
There are a few reasons. First and obvious reason, well, I can speak for myself, but first of all, we all like to share knowledge. So we had a lot of experience with sharing the knowledge with other people. We had like free workshops, and we organize meetups, and we write blog posts, and we help people on the internet. And writing a book is just one of the ways to help all of our clients and all the other people which come to us with the same questions, like how do you implement server communication, how do you implement testing, how do you structure your application. So this is one of the ways to just answer all of the questions at once. So just give them the book and say read it, and you'll get the answer. And there's also a reason that writing a book is a good thing to put in your resume. So when you tell people that, I also write a book on Redux, they kind of look at you from different perspective. But it's not that big of a deal. Like anyone can write a book. You just need enough time and investigate the topic very deeply. Putting it on the resume is one of the reasons. And also at that time, there was a lot of free content on the internet on how to use Redux and how to use Redux with React. And most of these tutorials and guides, they were really basic. So they explain some basic stuff. Like, for example, for server communication, everyone just took the easiest thing to explain, like the Redux thunk library, right? So just know you have asynchronous actions, and I'm getting a bit technical here, but there are multiple ways to do server communication with Redux. And one of the ways could be done through asynchronous actions. When you dispatch an action, which actually goes to server, fetches data, and does different things. And while this is so easy to explain, when you see it in real world applications, it's kind of when you're using it, you're shooting yourself in the leg, because testing these asynchronous actions is a lot of pain. Rewriting it, refactoring it, changing the underlying infrastructure of server calls. It's really hard when you have all this multiple asynchronous actions. So what we came up with, a lot of other smart people came up with, is actually using the concept of middleware for server communication. And this concept is so hard to explain. Like, for example, if you look at the middleware functions at Redux and how they look like, you can't really understand how you start to explain it, because it's a function that returns a function that returns a function that returns another function. And this concept is really hard to grasp, let alone to explain it. So a lot of tutorials online, they just don't do it. They concentrate on very very low level introduction to Redux and how to work with React. So just thought that, writing an actual book from our real world experience, and we've done a lot of dozens of projects for clients using Redux and not using Redux. We started work with React even before Redux came to exist. So we've seen it all, and we wanted to share it with the world, for some more advanced concepts, something that you might be notice along the way, a few months after you started building your application. but then it would be too late to rewrite everything.
For any current authors or budding authors out there, you managed to reach about 13,000 new readers just in the last couple of weeks, I think, and that's something a lot of people would like to be able to do. And I was wondering if you could explain if you and Boris did anything special around that promotion, besides making the book free, which is always the minimum price of the book free, which is always, an attractive thing to people. But that is a striking amount of people to reach.
First of all, we were surprised by ourselves because we never expected such an outreach. But the answer is quite simple. We didn't do much to promote it. It's all the power of Twitter and famous people retweeting our tweets. So we were lucky enough that Dan Abramov and Andrew, they are really nice people. And when we made this book free, first of all, it certainly helps to make this book free. And when they just retweeted it, and then Twitter got crazy and people started retweeting it and showing to their friends, because it feels like a book is really a desired topic. Like Redux, everyone uses Redux, and there aren't a lot of good quality, or I hope good quality materials on how to work real world applications Redux. So it's kind of sold itself. So people just were willing to retweet it and show it to their friends. Someone posted it on some blog sites. And it kind of just promoted itself. But maybe it's interesting to mention that when we make this book free, we actually made more money than selling it for a decent amount of money. So a lot of people they see the book as free and they understand the value and they just pay money even though they don't have to, and which is really really exciting and empowering to understand that there are a lot of people that really value your work and not just downloading it and forgetting about it.
Yeah, that's just for those listening who might not know. When you buy a Leanpub book, there's a minimum price and a suggested price that are set by the author or authors, and so you can actually set a minimum price of free and a suggested price of $9.99 or whatever price you want. And it is quite common for authors with books that have a minimum price of free on Leanpub to actually make quite a bit of money sometimes from those books. And yeah, it's often authors, when they discover this, often feel very empowered by it. But so do readers. They like being presented with a choice once they figure out what's going on, and they often do choose to pay for an author's work when they don't have to. It's been one of the more exciting things that we've discovered at Leanpub over the years. Moving on to one of my last questions, I wanted to ask you why you chose Leanpub as the platform for your book.
This is an interesting question because in the beginning we didn't think about self-publishing at all. So we thought about going to a well-known publisher and working with them because we didn't care about money. We cared more about exposure and people to get to know us that we wrote this book, and maybe potentially they could reach out to us asking for help for getting a project or something else. So we tried to reach out to a few publishers, and very quickly we realized that this is not the best way to go because all these publishers, they do a tremendous amount of work. Obviously, if you don't know publishing a book, it's not just writing a text and putting up a PDF and printing it or selling it online. There's a lot of reviews going on, technical reviews. You have to show it to different people to see that you didn't make any stupid mistakes. You have to proofread it. Like, as you can tell, English is not our strongest language out of three. So I originally born in Russia and lived for my whole life in Israel, and also I speak English. So we had a lot of grammar mistakes and phrasing mistakes. And you also have to design a book and you have to somehow market it. So once you wrote the book, how do you actually get it to market? How do you tell people about it? How do you make it popular? And publisher does a lot of these things, but there are some problems. So first of all, when you go with a publisher, you don't really own your book. So you work on a really tight schedule. You receive some amount of money, but once the book is published, you can't never decide to make it free for a week. You can't set a price. You can't really, get some copies to give to your friends. So you receive some amount of copies, and then you have to buy your own books. And the most intimidating part is that publisher usually put a small point in contract that you have to update your book on demand when new version of a library comes out. You have to actually see it and write a new chapter or update the whole book on their own schedule. And if you don't do that, then they might bring a different co-author and stuff like that. So kind of not owning the book, and we didn't want to how to say it? Forgot the word. Let's see.
You didn't want to relinquish the rights?
No, not relinquish the rights. We didn't want to to tell them that we are going to work whenever they want us to work on it. So I forget what I tried to rephrase it. So we didn't really want to give away our rights to the book. We wanted to have some freedom, making it free from time to time, or we're doing some workshops and speaking at conferences. So it's really good for us to say okay, so everyone who attends our workshops get a free book, and everyone who was in this talk get a free book. So it's this freedom was really important to us. And also we didn't want to sign for periodical updates when every time the library gets updated. And by the time we wrote the book, it took us over a year, and Redux released 21 or 22 versions of it. And every time, if we had to rewrite the book on the publisher schedule, we couldn't make it. So we tried to find different alternatives. And I can't remember how I discovered Leanpub. Maybe some friend told me about it. But we say that, okay, we're going to try, just write it the simplest way, put it on Leanpub, see how it goes. Anytime we could go with the publisher. So the part that I like most about Leanpub, they just give you complete freedom, right? If you want to, after your book gets promoted, you can take this manuscript and send it to O'Reilly or any other big publisher, and take it off Leanpub, and they wouldn't get offended. So it's this freedom is really empowering us to just go and do the actual writing, and worry about all the other things later. So the only thing we did is designing the cover, and hiring a copy editor, Rachel Head, which is helped us a lot with fixing our grammar, fixing our English. And Leanpub did all the rest. So we uploaded the manuscript, and we got the book that we can sell and print. So it was pretty amazing. We are really happy that we went the Leanpub way and we not ended up with a really draconic contract with a publisher.
And thanks for that answer and for the kind words about Leanpub. We appreciate that, and it's always nice to hear that we built Leanpub sort of for certain kinds of. I mean, it can be used for in lots of different ways, but what you're describing is very particularly the kind of need that we wanted to meet. I'm just curious if corresponding with readers is something that you were planning on doing, or you have been doing. Getting feedback from readers and then changing the book based on that feedback.
Well, we were actually really surprised about how people reacted to our book. So people were so kind. They were sending these reports. So they asked, okay, how can I help you with the book? So I found these chapters that are I just misunderstood them, and I feel that there is a problem with your code. And they say that this phrasing was not good enough. And they were really supportive. They said, we love your book, and here's a small problem we found. Can you please fix that? And we're really happy to receive this feedback, because I don't know, we could proofread it for days and for months, but when actual readers are reaching out to you and telling you that we really love the book, and this is a small typo I noticed, or small concept that you could have explained better, it's really good. It's really good.
And how did people reach out to you? Did you give out an email address in the introduction to the book, or did they reach out on Twitter?
Some of them reached on Twitter. Some of them wrote an email. I think some of them used this feature, contact the author, on Leanpub. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a bummer that we don't have this one issue tracker when everyone can just submit their issue in the book, and we can just go over it and prioritize them. So getting feedback from multiple channels is kind of overwhelming sometimes. So we have to keep our own list of things to fix in the book. but yeah, it was various channels, and people reached out from Twitter, from Leanpub, from email.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never quite thought about this before. I mean, we've had people talk about the issue of tracking issues and things like that, and things that are reported. At the same time, as it would be really useful to provide something that people could just go to on Leanpub. I've never quite thought before, but you also might lose a little bit of the human side of the interaction, which can make authors feel better about what they're doing and can make readers feel really good. I mean, when they hear back, when they get a message from an author, and especially if they see the change that they suggested incorporated into the book, it just makes them feel good. My last question is, if there were any feature we could build for you, if you could ask us for anything.
Oh, yes, so many.
Okay. Well, pick maybe one or two.
Okay, so I think that one of the most challenging things were to actually co-author the book, because we tried to find any software or any online application to be able to write Markdown together and then set it to a copy editor or maybe to a reviewer and to leave comments on that. And we haven't found any better way than just using Google Docs. So what we did, we wrote Google Docs and then set it to our copy editor, and she fixed some grammar and added some comments and asked some questions. And then we checked it back and changed stuff and did a couple of more iterations every time. And then we had to convert it to Markdown, and then we just added it to our repository to Git and send it to Leanpub. And when we had any typos or we wanted to make any changes, it was really hard to do, because writing Markdown that way is really hard. So once it's in the repository and we want to change it, we have to take all the content back to Google Docs, edit it, send it to our copy editor again, and then doing the whole process all over again. So if you could write an editor when multiple authors can, kind of Google Docs style, edit it live and add some comments and, make suggestions, and then other people to collaborate on it, that would be really great. And that to automatically export it to Leanpub format, because all this Google Docs Markdown conversion was really hard for us to do.
Okay, yeah, thanks for explaining that situation. Collaborating around writing documents is in itself a tricky thing. There have been entire startups devoted to that, and it's definitely something that we would like to be able to help authors with more. And especially the experience you're describing, where you're also dealing with a copy editor, really presents some interesting challenges. But it's definitely something we'd like to find solutions for. Well, thanks very much, Ilya, for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it, and I want to say congratulations again on reaching so many readers with your recent promotion. And yeah, thanks for being a Leanpub author.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for providing such a great platform for all the authors.